Sony has just dropped the ZV-E1 and this camera is amazing. It's the smallest full frame camera ever and it delivers cinema level quality. But I know what you're thinking, Sony's recycling their sensors. There's nothing new here, it's the same as A7S III, FX3, but that couldn't be further from the truth. And it's going to overheat for sure. So we'll test that out right now and we'll see how we go as we record this video. There is so much to get into, but real quick, I'm Andy, I'm a photographer, videographer, content creator. Check out my work on the gram. I'm not going to buy an FX6, but I'd really like to capture some cinematics. But this is essentially 99% my dream camera, except for one little thing which we'll get to later. But let's dive into the positives, and there are a ton of these. Also, quick disclaimer, Sony gave me this camera to take on a trip to Japan, so follow along if you want to see that. But that being said, I'm making this video on my own free will, I'm not getting paid, and I personally don't really have a big audience to lie to anyway, so these are my honest thoughts. So the first positive, which may be a negative to the Sony fanboys, is that this ZV-E1, which I'm filming with right now, has the same sensor as the FX3 and the Sony A7S III. If you live under a rock and don't really know what that means, it basically delivers amazing 4K 60, full frame, no crop. It can deliver 4K 120 with a firmware update in the future, which is going to upset some people, but it's not that important. I am praying we're not going to have to pay for that. I'm pretty sure we won't have to, but it will come down the line. It offers amazing dynamic range, which Gerald Undone covers very well, about 12.5 usable stops. The low lights performance of this camera would be the same as the A7S III. It's amazing. You can see the stars, you have night vision, so you will never have troubles with low light again on this camera. When comparing the video to the A7 IV, I think it's fairly comparable. Because the image is downsampled from the A7 IV, it's supposedly supposed to be a little bit sharper, but it's fairly hard to tell when you compare the footage together. Because the sensor is essentially the same, you can expect the exact same quality you get out of the A7S III, which a lot of people use in this day and age. So to someone like me, it's not really knock your socks off because the A7 IV can produce video that is fairly similar despite that having a crop, and this is uncropped, which leans me towards this. But to have cinema level quality in the smallest full frame body and for a cheaper price, about the same price as the A7 IV, 2,500 or 3.8K in Australia, is amazing. The autofocus on this thing is a game changer. I thought the A7 IV had good autofocus. This thing, you just turn it on. I don't need to mess with any modes. It will track me wherever I go, even if I turn my head around to the side, even if I'm a tiny dot on the screen, it can tell where I am and track on my eye, which is ridiculous. The autofocus system is what is on the A7R5 for a fraction of price, which is honestly amazing. And I can confidently say I can set the camera down, walk wherever I want, and this thing will keep me in focus, which is just ridiculous. There's also a product focus mode, which is kind of actually handy. I've turned the product focus mode on right now, and I'm a sick tech YouTuber now. I can just put whatever product I want to the camera. It focuses great. I can just put it there, even though my face is in the back, it will focus on the product, which is pretty cool. So now I'm Marquez Brownlee and I'm doing some sick review. So the autofocus is amazing, which is a huge upside over both the FX3 and the A7S III, but the IBIS on this thing is also game changing. First of all, there is mechanical IBIS. However, when testing compared to the A7 IV, I think it's basically the same. Even though the body is very small, I don't see much differences when you use the complete standard modes, but the ZV-E1 introduces the dynamic active stabilization mode. Basically, it's active stabilization mode that's seen on other Sony cameras, but on steroids. So you crop in about maybe 1.3 times. On the 24mm, it looks like a 28mm lens once you crop in. Let me show you what the crop looks like right now. It's significant, but not that bad and definitely usable. And Sony are actually nice enough to apply clear image zoom, so when you crop in, it doesn't look like crap, and it's still technically a true 4K image with that Sony magic baked in. If you look under a microscope, it's probably a little bit less quality, but you really can't tell. But in terms of performance, when you walk with this thing in dynamic mode, it is crazy. It's basically like walking with a gimbal, which is the truest form of no gimbal handheld footage. Obviously, the Lumix S5 II has amazing IBIS, but the ZV-E1 might just edge out the Lumix S5 II in terms of walking in a straight line using the dynamic mode. But keep in mind that Lumix S5 relies on actually mechanical stabilization to stabilize their footage. This is purely software and kind of just like algorithms running in the background to smoothen out your footage. It's also worth noting when walking in a straight line, this does great. However, when trying to do a bit of an orbit, you can see it becomes very jittery. So I probably wouldn't use the dynamic mode if we were doing that. And instead I just use the normal active mode and then stabilize in post. I'm someone who really loves handheld content creation. I don't want to carry a gimbal. It takes away from the venture. I like going outdoors and exploring. This is almost a dream come true for me. Obviously we could get to one day where it actually looks like what you get from Callus Brow straight into the camera, but I think we need some faster processing for that to happen. What really surprised me with the ZV-E1 is there's not only dynamic active stabilization, there's also the active mode, which has been vastly improved. I basically strapped this camera to the A7 IV and also took attempts where I gave it my absolute all to ninja walk and get the smoothest clip possible, and the normal active stabilization mode did much better than the A7 IV. And that mode only has a 1.1 times crop, which is extremely usable in my opinion. I may go into this a bit more in another video, but this camera does a way better job, which is really surprising to me. Let's also go quickly through a new feature roundup with this camera. There's a bokeh button, which is similar to the ZV-E10, which basically, if you have no idea how to use a camera, that's nice to give yourself some bokeh, but I always use manual. We also have a cinematic mode, which is also suited for beginners. There are basically a ton of permutations of different presets, so you can get a look baked in with cinematic bars, and that's literally it. There is a beauty skin mode, and I personally wouldn't use this because I'm already ugly, so there's no point. We also have an AI tracking mode, which locks onto you and crops in to keep you in the center of the frame. I think it actually tracks fairly well, which is kind of cool. I don't know when you would use this, because keep in mind that you're getting a 4K image, it's cropping in, there's going to be some clear image zoom there. Keep that in mind. I think it is very neat. You could do this in post, but the fact that it's all in camera is pretty spectacular in my opinion. What do you reckon? I think you could occasionally use this if you want some movement and you're shooting by yourself. Another feature I'm very pleased about is the ability to load your own LUTs so you can preview them straight out the camera. This is something that the FX3 has, but not the A7S III, and that's going to leave some people pissed and praying for a firmware update, which will probably not come, which is a bit sad. But it's honestly great to have this feature so you can put your favorite S-Log3 LUTs on there and you can see what you're getting and make sure you do not under or overexpose the image. The form factor on this camera is honestly off the charts. It is the lightest full frame camera, about 500 and something grams. I'm filming on this right now, but if you had a smaller lens like the f1.8 35mm, put it on the camera and it's really portable, and you can honestly slip this in like your jacket pocket. Something that would also be very interesting is getting that small 24mm Samyang lens. Not the best lens, but the form factor, you could honestly put this in your pocket and I would bring this everywhere I am. Just the idea of getting FX3 footage everywhere you go is just remarkable. Another quick benefit is that the user interface and the menus are slightly changed on this camera. Personally for me, it's not that different to the A7 IV. There are some features that are a little bit more handy. I wouldn't say it's revolutionary, but it's nice to see Sony taking in some steps to make things better for their users. So these are the main positives that appeal to me. If you are looking for a full breakdown, I'm sure Gerald Undone has a video himself going through all the specs if you want to know that. But now diving into the negatives. So to achieve the smallest form factor to date, we had to skip out on a few features. First of all, there's no mode dial, which is kind of a bit of a letdown for me. It will take a few more clicks to enter the menu and click the mode that I like. It's not the end of the world, but it has caused me to shoot 8-bit in the video, which although very avoidable is a little bit of a shame. We also only have one SD card slot, which is a bit of a shame as well. However, I personally only rely on one SD card slot even on my A7 IV, which is not great, but that's mainly due to avoid any chances of overheating, because as you can imagine, more SD cards, more writing, more heat. And for the pros out there, there is no electronic viewfinder, so you can't look in and have a look at what you're shooting. That's probably gonna piss off photographers. I shoot a lot of video, and even when I was a photographer, I always looked at the screen, which is probably pretty bad, probably caused me to miss some focus. Overall, I personally won't miss the EVF that much. However, it is kind of nice to have a good look when it's a really sunny day to see where your exposure is at. And on the topic of pro, this really isn't a pro camera because of all these shortcomings, and also the fact that it will likely overheat when shooting for a long period of time. I've been told it shoots a solid 30 minutes, 4K 30, 10-bit footage, so that is a drawback and the main reason why it's not pro, but for the majority of users, 30 minutes continuous is a long time. I've filmed a bunch of TikToks, Reels, brand posts, all with this camera, and it's done amazing. No overheating, no shutting down. And if you're still sour about that, the R5 from Canon overheated, had the same recording limits, and everyone bought that like it was nothing. And so the only reason why this is not my dream camera is the fact that it has the 12 megapixel sensor that we're talking about, which takes 12 megapixel photos. It's almost like an oxymoron. The 12 megapixel sensor allows this amazing video performance, but in turn sacrifices a little bit on the photography side. Now don't get me wrong, you can still take photos with amazing low light performance, great dynamic range. However, people will not like the fact that's 12 megapixels because you can't blow them up, you can't resize them however much you want. Obviously, if I wanted to take the best photo possible, I'll take the A7 IV with me and not take this camera, but the ZV-E1 will still take better photos than your iPhone. 12 megapixels, although small, you can definitely printed out. You can't cover your whole wall, but you can still print out something like I have here with a 12 megapixel camera. So it's really not the end of the world and great for some decent photography, especially for Instagram. So in regards to affordability and who should buy this camera is a steal. $2,500 or 3,800 Australian dollars for FX3 quality is mind-blowing. Obviously, if you're a pro filmmaker, you have an FX3, maybe A7S III, the reasons to upgrade aren't that apparent. This would be a nice B cam and just great for your own personal travels. And even though the autofocus and the IBIS is drastically improved, it's hard to sell yourself on buying the same sensor again for another $2,500 in that case. But if you're like me and you're looking to get some amazing video and you don't have those cameras, I had the A7 IV. Getting that 4K 60 uncropped was extremely important to me, and this is going to be amazing for me. But in a nutshell, if you want the best bang for your buck video and you don't have those cameras, the A7S III and the FX3, this is a bit of a no-brainer for you. It's got all the modern Sony features, amazing autofocus, great IBIS, and this is just going to be a dream to shoot with. Obviously, this will fulfill your video capabilities. The 12 megapixels for photos is not horrible, but you would be purchasing this camera primarily for the amazing FX3 sensor and for video. I cannot wait to shoot with this camera more. I'm going to Japan. Subscribe, we're going to capture some amazing content. This camera with all its addition is like a dream come true. The bang for your buck is through the roof. I can't wait to use it more. Stay tuned, I'll catch you in the next one.